Smoke drifts across the ruins of a broken world. The great bronze gates of Troy lie shattered in the ash. For 10 long years, these massive walls stood unbroken. They repelled the greatest army the world had ever seen. Now, they are nothing more than scattered stones. The Trojan War is finally over. A profound silence has settled over the coastal plains of Anatolia. It is the heavy, unsettling quiet that follows a decade of slaughter. The wind blows cold off the dark waters of the Hellespont. Down by the harbor, the Greek encampment is a hive of motion. Thousands of men are preparing to leave this cursed shore. They are loading their black ships with the spoils of an empire. Heavy bronze cauldrons and golden tripods are stacked in the hulls. But this vast wealth means little to men who have lost their youth. They have spent 10 years living in temporary, wind-swept tents. They have watched their closest friends die in the dust. They want only to return to the quiet lives they left behind. Among the shouting commanders walks a king from a minor island. His name is Odysseus. He is the ruler of Ithaca. His kingdom is a small, rocky island in the distant Ionian Sea. He is a man known not for his raw physical strength. He is respected entirely for the sharpness of his mind. It was his intellect that finally broke the agonizing stalemate of the war. He conceived the brilliant deception of the wooden horse. He engineered the absolute destruction of Troy. Yet, victory feels remarkably like exhaustion. Odysseus stands quietly on the shoreline. He looks out over the dark, restless waters of the Aegean Sea. His hands are calloused and rough from years of combat. His eyes hold a deep, persistent weariness. He does not turn to look back at the burning city. The destruction offers him no joy whatsoever. His gaze is fixed entirely on the western horizon. He dreams of olive groves shining in the Mediterranean sun. He remembers the harsh, beautiful cliffs of his homeland. He thinks constantly of his wife, Penelope. He pictures his son, Telemachus. The boy was only a fragile infant when the black ships first sailed. Now, he must be a young man standing on the verge of adulthood. An entire decade of life has vanished into the blood-soaked soil. The Greeks have a specific word for this profound longing. They call it nostos. It is the burning, painful desire for a glorious homecoming. Odysseus feels this longing so deeply it aches in his chest. The Ithacan crew gathers around their silent king. They are hardened survivors of a brutal, unforgiving era. They have fought side by side through unimaginable horrors. They have endured plagues, starvation, and relentless combat. Now they share a single, consuming desire. They simply want to see their families again. Their ship bobs gently in the harbor water. It is a sleek, beautiful vessel built for endurance. The dark wooden hull is sealed with thick pine pitch. It was constructed using ancient mortise and tenon joints. Large eyes are painted on the bow to guide the ship safely. It is a masterpiece of Bronze Age engineering. Before the great fleet departs, the Greek kings gather one last time. They stand on the beach to bid their final farewells. The High King Agamemnon embraces Odysseus. Agamemnon carries the heavy, exhausting burden of supreme command. His face is lined with the stress of ruling difficult men. Menelaus steps forward and offers his deep gratitude. It was for his stolen wife that this vast armada was assembled. Countless lives were changed forever for a single marriage. But it is the elderly King Nestor who offers a sobering thought. Nestor is a man of vast experience and ancient wisdom. He has survived multiple generations of warriors. He looks out at the sea with a highly cautious eye. He speaks slowly to the clever king of Ithaca. He warns that the war may be won, but the ocean is unpredictable. He reminds them that the gods have their own complex designs. Mortal plans are fragile, temporary things. They can be swept away by a single shift in the wind. Odysseus nods respectfully to the old king, but his heart is already miles away across the water. He is a master navigator who deeply trusts his own skills. He knows the hidden currents and the seasonal winds. He is confident in his ability to bring his men home safely. He cannot possibly know how true Nestor's warning will become. He cannot know that his journey is only just beginning. The morning of departure finally arrives. The sky over Troy is a brilliant, cloudless blue. A strong, favorable breeze rolls off the warming land. The sailors eagerly raise the great square sail. The heavy linen canvas catches the wind with a sharp crack. The ship surges forward into the open water. The men take their assigned places at the wooden benches. They pull at the long oars in perfect, unified rhythm. The blades slice through the deep blue waves. The sound of their rowing is a steady, comforting heartbeat. Slowly, the ruined coastline of Troy begins to fade. The thick smoke from the burning city blends into the horizon. It becomes nothing more than a grey smudge against the sky. Then it vanishes entirely from view. The war is truly behind them. The open sea stretches out like an endless promise. The men are in incredibly high spirits. They sing ancient working songs as they row. The weather remains perfectly calm for several days. The wind pushes them steadily and smoothly westward. They sail past rugged islands and hidden coves. The Aegean Sea is a beautiful, sparkling jewel in the sunlight. The rhythmic creaking of the ship is a lullaby of progress. At night, they pull the ship onto quiet, sandy beaches. They light warm fires on the safe shores. They roast fresh meat and drink thick, dark wine. They mix the wine with water from local springs. They share vivid stories of the battles they survived. They talk endlessly of the wives and children waiting for them. The heavy trauma of the war begins to slowly soften. It is replaced by the powerful anticipation of homecoming. Odysseus often sits apart from his celebrating men. He watches the vast night sky with total concentration. He reads the turning constellations like a detailed map. He tracks the slow movement of the Great Bear. He watches the bright rising of the Pleiades. These stars are his silent, ancient guides. They have navigated sailors across these dangerous waters for centuries. He calculates their precise position carefully. Every night, he knows they are a little closer to Ithaca. The journey seems entirely blessed by the heavens. The sea is smooth, accommodating, and welcoming. The men begin to relax their tight muscles. They let down their emotional guard completely. They firmly believe the absolute worst of their trials is behind them. They think the 10-year war was their ultimate test. They do not realize the sea holds its own ancient memory. The Mediterranean is a beautiful but highly temperamental realm. It is a place where human logic means very little. To the ancient Greeks, the sea is not just water. It is a living, breathing entity with moods and desires. It is the vast domain of powerful, unpredictable forces. It demands total respect and constant vigilance. But the men are blinded by their overwhelming desire for home. They measure their progress in days and distances. They forget that time on the ocean is entirely fluid. On the 10th day of their voyage, the atmosphere shifts. It happens subtly at first. The air grows suddenly heavy and oppressive. The steady, reliable wind drops to an absolute standstill. The great sail hangs limp and useless against the wooden mast. The sea becomes eerily, unnervingly quiet. The surface of the water is as smooth as dark glass. The men stop rowing and look around in confusion. Odysseus stands up and looks toward the northern horizon. He sees a strange, unnatural coloration in the sky. The bright blue is swallowed by clouds the color of bruised bronze. The temperature begins to drop rapidly. A low, deep sound rumbles across the flat water. It is not the familiar sound of a natural storm gathering. It sounds like something massive and ancient waking up. The old King Nestor had spoken the absolute truth. The gods indeed have their own designs. Mortal plans are about to be torn apart like fragile threads. The quiet sea begins to heave with a strange new energy. The water darkens from deep blue to the color of iron. A cold wind touches the faces of the terrified sailors. The long, gentle journey is over. The true test of Odysseus is about to begin. The wind strikes the ship with the force of a physical blow. It does not build gradually from a gentle breeze. It descends from the bruised sky with absolute suddenness. The heavy square sail snaps violently against the wooden mast. The thick ropes groan under the immense, sudden pressure. This is not a natural Mediterranean squall. The air feels charged with an undeniable, terrifying malice. It is a storm summoned by divine will. The Aegean Sea is completely transformed in a matter of moments. The flat, glassy surface shatters into towering walls of water. Waves rise like moving, dark mountains. Their crests are crowned with freezing white foam. The sea spray stings the sailors' faces like thrown gravel. The sky turns a deep, unnatural shade of black. It swallows the afternoon sun completely. The men are plunged into a premature, terrifying night. Odysseus shouts commands over the deafening roar of the wind. He orders the men to secure the loose cargo. They fight to tie down the heavy bronze treasures of Troy. They struggle to lower the massive sail before the mast shatters. The ship climbs the face of a massive wave. It hangs suspended for a terrifying second at the peak. Then it plunges violently into the deep trough below. The wooden hull shudders intensely with every impact. The men are thrown violently against the rowing benches. They bail water with frantic, desperate energy. The freezing sea pours over the wooden sides. It threatens to drag them down into the crushing depth. Odysseus stands at the stern, gripping the long steering oar. His powerful hands are blistered and rubbed raw. His eyes burn fiercely from the relentless salt spray. He uses every ounce of his strength to keep the ship straight. If the vessel turns sideways to these monstrous waves, it will capsize immediately. He battles the ocean with sheer, stubborn willpower. For 3 days and 3 nights, the tempest rages without pause. There is no rest. There is no food. There is only the freezing water and the screaming wind. The men lose all sense of time and direction. The heavy cloud cover hides the sun during the day. At night, the guiding stars are completely obscured. The ancient map of the night sky is erased. They are pushed relentlessly by the invisible, howling force. They are driven far beyond the familiar shipping lanes of the Aegean. They are swept past the known borders of the world. They are crossing the invisible boundary between human geography and ancient myth. The storm is stripping away their previous reality. It is carrying them into an uncharted, deeply alien realm. When the divine fury finally breaks, it happens as suddenly as it began. The howling wind simply drops away. The massive, churning waves slowly subside into gentle, rolling swells. A profound, ringing silence replaces the roar of the tempest. The heavy clouds part to reveal a pale, exhausted dawn. The exhausted sailors collapse against the wooden benches. They are shivering, soaked, and entirely drained of strength. They weep openly with the sheer relief of survival. Odysseus remains standing at the steering oar. He looks up at the sky as the stars briefly appear before sunrise. He studies the fading constellations with a deep frown. The patterns of light above them are fundamentally wrong. The familiar shapes he has known since childhood are missing. The celestial map has shifted in impossible ways. His vast navigational knowledge is completely useless here. He realizes, with a cold certainty, that they are entirely lost. They have been blown into seas that exist on no human chart. As the morning sun climbs higher, a thick white mist burns off the water. A new coastline slowly reveals itself on the horizon. It does not look like the harsh, rocky islands of Greece. It does not look like the sandy shores of Troy. This land appears to float softly on the surface of the sea. It is surrounded by an eerie, dreamlike stillness. The water in the harbor is as smooth as polished silver. As the ship drifts closer, a strange scent reaches the exhausted crew. It is not the smell of salt and drying seaweed. It is a heavy, intoxicating fragrance of sweet flowers. It rolls across the water like an invisible, comforting blanket. The shoreline is a vibrant, impossible shade of green. Rolling hills are carpeted with enormous, iridescent blossoms. The flowers glow gently in the morning light. The landscape looks completely untouched by harsh weather or time. It is a place of absolute, unbroken peace. To the starving, battered sailors, it looks like paradise. They want nothing more than to drag the ship onto the soft sand. They want to collapse in the warm, fragrant grass and sleep. But Odysseus is a man defined by his caution. His sharp mind evaluates the perfect stillness of the shore. He knows that extreme beauty in this world often hides extreme danger. He refuses to risk his entire crew on an unknown beach. He orders the men to drop the heavy stone anchor in the shallows. The ship settles quietly in the mirrored water. Odysseus selects 3 of his most trusted, reliable men. These are veterans who have proven their discipline in battle. He instructs them to take the small wooden rowboat. They are to go ashore quietly and carefully. They must find fresh water and locate any inhabitants. They are ordered to observe, gather information, and return immediately. The 3 men lower the small boat into the still harbor. The wooden oars barely make a sound as they row toward the beach. Odysseus watches them from the high stern of the ship. His eyes narrow as they pull their boat onto the soft, white sand. He watches his men walk slowly toward the glowing, flower-covered hills. The air around the island seems to shimmer slightly. It warps the light, making the figures look hazy and indistinct. The men disappear into the vibrant, beautiful foliage. The crew on the ship waits in the quiet morning heat. An hour passes in absolute silence. Then another hour slips away. The sun climbs to the highest point in the sky. The water laps gently against the dark wooden hull. There is no sign of the scouting party. No shouts are heard from the gentle hills. The island remains perfectly, unnervingly still. The afternoon heat presses down heavily on the anchored ship. Odysseus paces the raised wooden deck of the stern. The silence of the island is deeply unnatural. In the world of bronze and spear, silence usually means an ambush. But this quiet feels entirely different. It feels like the heavy, dreamless sleep of the dead. His sharp instincts tell him his men are in terrible danger. But there is no clash of weapons ringing through the hills. There is no smoke rising from hidden fires. There is only the intoxicating, sweet scent of the flowers. Odysseus can wait no longer. He selects a heavily armed detachment of his strongest fighters. They draw their bronze swords and strap on their heavy shields. They lower a second boat into the glassy water. Every muscle is tense, preparing for a sudden, violent assault. They drag the boat onto the soft, white beach. The men step cautiously into the vibrant green foliage. The air here is thick, warm, and cloying. It smells heavily of honey and blooming night flowers. It makes the mind feel strangely slow and unbothered. Just beyond the first ridge of hills, they find their missing scouts. They are not bound with ropes or bleeding from wounds. They are sitting in a loose circle on the soft grass. They are surrounded by the inhabitants of this strange land. The locals are a gentle, deeply serene people. Their faces carry expressions of absolute, unbroken contentment. They move with the slow, deliberate grace of people walking underwater. These are the Lotus Eaters. They carry no weapons and build no fortresses. They simply exist in a state of perpetual, timeless peace. They welcome the heavily armed Greeks with soft, unbothered smiles. They offer their guests the only food they cultivate. It is the lotus flower, sweet beyond any mortal description. Odysseus watches his 3 seasoned warriors in total horror. These are men who survived a decade of brutal trench warfare. Now, their weapons lie discarded in the dirt. Their eyes are glazed, distant, and completely empty of purpose. They have eaten the magical fruit of the island. The lotus does not poison the physical body. It attacks something far more vital to a Greek warrior. It completely dissolves the pain of memory. The fierce, burning longing for home simply evaporates. The faces of their wives and children fade into irrelevant mist. The urgency of their perilous journey means absolutely nothing. Time stretches out like warm honey in the afternoon sun. They simply want to sit in the grass forever. Odysseus realizes this is a danger far worse than Trojan spears. A spear only kills the flesh. This sweet fruit murders the soul. It destroys the very identity of the men who eat it. Without the burning desire to return home, they are already dead. Odysseus moves with sudden, ruthless efficiency. He commands his armed guards to seize the 3 scouts. The men who ate the lotus do not fight back with weapons. They simply weep like heartbroken children. They reach desperately for the gentle hands of the lotus eaters. They beg in slurred voices to be left in the peaceful dream. The gentle locals make no move to interfere. They watch with serene, pitying smiles as the Greeks depart. Odysseus and his guards drag their weeping comrades down to the beach. They haul them bodily into the small wooden boats. They row frantically back to the waiting ship. Once aboard, Odysseus orders the 3 men bound tightly. They are tied directly to the heavy rowing benches beneath the deck. He commands the crew to raise the heavy stone anchor immediately. He orders them to row with every ounce of their remaining strength. They must put distance between themselves and this terrible paradise. As the ship cuts through the mirrored water, the spell slowly breaks. The heavy scent of the lotus flowers fades on the sea breeze. The bound men weep bitterly as their painful memories return. The tide of their former lives rushes back in. Odysseus stands at the stern, watching the beautiful island vanish. A cold realization settles heavily over his brilliant mind. The war at Troy only threatened their physical survival. This new journey is actively hunting their humanity. The sea is testing what they are willing to forget. They sail onward through waters that grow progressively darker. The gentle, dreamlike atmosphere of the lotus eaters completely dissipates. The air turns sharp, cold, and heavy with salt. The next morning reveals a vastly different coastline on the horizon. There are no soft beaches or glowing flowers here. Massive, jagged cliffs rise like sheer walls of iron from the sea. The rock faces are scarred with enormous, dark caves. From a distance, the caves look like empty, staring eye sockets. The landscape is incredibly harsh and totally unforgiving. A strange, deep sound echoes across the choppy water. It is the heavy, resonant bleating of thousands of massive animals. The men look up at the towering cliffs with growing unease. This is not a land that welcomes delicate travelers. This is a place designed for giants. The jagged cliffs cast long, cold shadows across the dark water. Odysseus orders his ship into a small, concealed cove. The men row silently, their eyes fixed on the towering rock faces. The air here feels heavy, ancient, and deeply unwelcoming. This is an island that completely defies human civilization. There are no plowed fields or carefully planted vineyards. There are no bustling harbors, no trading ships, and no formal laws. This is the remote, untamed territory of the Cyclopes. They are a race of solitary, towering giants. They do not gather in councils or build walled cities. They live entirely isolated in the high, cold mountains. They answer to no authority other than their own immense strength. Odysseus secures the black ship on the rocky shoreline. He knows the profound danger of this desolate place, but his mind is driven by a restless, unyielding curiosity. He is a man who hungers to understand the unknown. He selects 12 of his absolute bravest fighters. He orders the rest of the exhausted crew to remain hidden with the ship. Before leaving the beach, he takes a heavy goatskin pouch. It is filled with incredibly potent, unmixed dark wine. This wine is a rare gift from a priest of Apollo. It is so strong it must normally be diluted with water. Odysseus carries it as a peace offering for whatever they might find. The 13 men begin the steep, grueling climb up the cliff face. The path is rough and heavily worn by massive feet. They ascend in total silence, listening to the wind howl through the rocks. As they climb higher, the scale of the landscape begins to change. Everything around them feels entirely out of proportion. Near the summit, they find the entrance to a massive cavern. The opening is vast enough to swallow a Greek warship. Thick vines of dark ivy hang down over the dark opening. A heavy, pungent odor drifts from the shadowed interior. It is the strong, unmistakable smell of raw milk and animal musk. Odysseus steps slowly into the gloom of the massive cave. His 12 men follow closely behind, their hands resting on their bronze swords. As their eyes adjust to the darkness, the true scale of the space is revealed. The ceiling arches high above them, lost in the deep shadows. This is not merely a wild cave. It is a highly organized, functioning dairy farm, but it is built for a being of terrifying proportions. Great wooden shelves line the curved stone walls. They sag under the weight of enormous wheels of aging cheese. Each wheel of cheese is as large as a bronze shield. Below the shelves sit massive stone bowls and wooden pails. These containers are large enough for a grown man to bathe in. They are filled to the brim with rich, white whey. Deep inside the cavern, heavy wooden pens hold hundreds of animals. They are sheep and goats of impossible, monstrous size. The men walk through the cavern in absolute, quiet awe. But their wonder is quickly replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The sheer size of the tools implies a master of terrifying power. The men turn to Odysseus, their faces pale with genuine fear. They beg their king to act with swift, practical logic. They want to take the massive cheeses and drive the sheep to the ship. They urge him to steal the provisions and flee the island immediately. It is a sound, reasonable military strategy for survival. But Odysseus refuses their desperate pleas. His brilliant mind is clouded by his own complex pride. He is bound by the sacred, ancient Greek laws of hospitality. He firmly believes that all beings must honor the rules of the gods. Guests must be treated with respect and offered formal gifts. He wants to face the master of this enormous cave. He wants to see the giant with his own eyes. It is a fatal miscalculation born of extreme hubris. The men sit in the dark corners of the cave, paralyzed by anxiety. They wait as the afternoon sun slowly sinks below the horizon. The light inside the cavern fades into a heavy, oppressive gloom. Then, the stone floor beneath them begins to vibrate. It is a slow, rhythmic thudding that shakes dust from the high ceiling. The sound grows steadily louder, echoing against the cliff face. A massive shadow falls across the wide entrance of the cave. The giant has returned from his high mountain pastures. His name is Polyphemus, a direct son of the sea god Poseidon. He is a mountain of solid muscle and coarse, wild hair. He carries a bundle of dry firewood on his broad back. The bundle is the size of a fully grown pine tree. He throws the heavy timber onto the stone floor with a deafening crash. The sound rings through the cavern like a thunderclap. The hidden Greeks press themselves flat against the cold, dark walls. They hold their breath in absolute, terrified silence. Polyphemus drives his massive flock of sheep into the cavern. The animals fill the space with a chaotic symphony of bleating. Once the last sheep has entered, the giant turns back to the doorway. He places his massive hands beneath a smooth, solid boulder. The stone is so large that 24 horses could not move it. With a low grunt of effort, he heaves the boulder into place. It seals the entrance of the cave with a heavy, grinding thud. The last sliver of twilight is completely extinguished. The Greeks are now trapped inside a pitch-black, solid stone tomb. There is absolutely no way out. In the darkness, the giant begins his evening chores. He milks the massive ewes with practiced, rhythmic efficiency. He separates the milk into the massive stone vats. When his work is done, he turns his attention to the firewood. He sparks a flame and breathes life into the dry timber. A bright, flickering fire suddenly illuminates the vast cavern. The dancing light casts long, monstrous shadows across the walls. It illuminates the face of Polyphemus for the very first time. In the exact center of his broad, heavy forehead sits a single eye. It is a massive, dark orb that reflects the leaping flames. The giant turns his enormous head, surveying his home. The firelight washes over the dark corners of the cave. It glints sharply off the bronze armor of the trembling Greeks. The single, terrible eye stops moving. The giant stares directly at the tiny, armored men hiding in the shadows. The silence in the cavern becomes absolute. A heavy, rumbling voice echoes off the stone walls. The voice of the giant does not sound remotely human. It grates like massive millstones, crushing heavy grain together. He demands to know who has invaded his private sanctuary. He asks if they are wandering merchants or violent pirates. Odysseus steps forward into the flickering red firelight. He relies entirely on his natural gift for diplomacy. He speaks eloquently of their long, agonizing journey from ruined Troy. He invokes the sacred, absolute name of Zeus. He firmly reminds the giant of the ancient laws of hospitality. He asks for the protection owed to all weary travelers. But as Odysseus speaks, he closely studies the giant's single eye. He does not see the warmth of a potential host. He sees the cold, terrifying intelligence of an apex predator. Polyphemus answers with a voice like distant, rolling thunder. He states clearly that his kind care nothing for the gods. They follow absolutely no laws but their own immense strength. The giant does not reach for a club or a blade. His massive hands simply dart forward with blinding, impossible speed. He seizes two of the heavily armored Greek warriors. The violence that follows is utterly beyond human comprehension. Polyphemus is not merely defending his isolated territory. He views these trespassing men as nothing more than convenient livestock. The cavern echoes with sounds that completely defy description. The remaining Greeks are frozen in absolute, paralyzing terror. They watch their loyal comrades consumed in the dancing firelight. When the horrific meal is finished, the giant simply lies down. He stretches his massive bulk entirely across the cave entrance. His deep, rumbling snores soon shake the high stone ceiling. The surviving Greeks huddle together in the darkest corner. They are surrounded by the heavy smell of blood and damp wool. Odysseus sits awake, his mind racing through desperate military strategies. His hand rests heavily on the cold hilt of his bronze sword. He calculates the exact distance to the sleeping giant's exposed throat. He knows he could drive the blade deep into the flesh, but a cold, terrifying logic stays his weapon. If the giant dies, the massive boulder remains firmly in place. They will be entombed forever with a rotting, colossal corpse. Brute strength cannot possibly save them from this nightmare. Survival will require a completely different kind of warfare. As pale morning light bleeds through the cracks of the boulder, an idea forms. The horrific morning routine perfectly mirrors the night before. The giant wakes and immediately devours two more terrified men. He effortlessly rolls the massive stone away from the entrance. He drives his great flock of sheep out into the harsh sunlight. Then he seals the cavern completely shut behind him. The surviving Greeks are plunged back into heavy, oppressive darkness. But Odysseus has already spotted their only chance for salvation. Lying near the back of the cave is an enormous piece of timber. It is a massive trunk of unshaped, green olive wood. The giant clearly intended to dry it for a walking staff. It is as thick and heavy as the mast of a warship. Odysseus issues quiet, precise commands to his desperate men. They use their sharp bronze swords to hack away a large section. They work in the shadows, their hands trembling with adrenaline. They shave the end of the heavy timber down to a wicked point. They carry the heavy wooden stake to the remnants of the giant's fire. They thrust the sharpened end deep into the glowing red embers. The fire hardens the green wood until it is as dense as forged iron. They quickly bury the lethal weapon beneath piles of sheep dung. Then they wait together in the suffocating, silent darkness. The hours drag on with agonizing, brutal slowness. Every man knows exactly what will happen when the sun goes down. They listen intently to the howling wind outside the stone door. They wait for the earth to begin trembling once again. The late afternoon bleeds slowly into twilight. The men sit in the crushing silence of the cavern. They listen to their own ragged breathing in the dark. Then the familiar, terrifying vibration returns to the stone floor. It is the heavy, rhythmic tread of the returning giant. The massive boulder is dragged aside with a grinding roar. A brief flash of evening light pierces the gloom. The great flock of sheep rushes into the cave. They fill the air with their loud, chaotic bleating. Then the heavy stone is dragged back into place. The tomb is sealed for the second time. Polyphemus moves methodically through his evening chores. He separates the massive ewes and milks them in the dark. He sparks the fire, casting violent red shadows across the walls. The flickering light reveals the remaining Greeks hiding in the corners. Without a word, the giant reaches into the shadows. He effortlessly seizes two more men in his massive hands. The horrific sounds of his meal echo through the cavern. Odysseus watches the slaughter with a face like carved stone. He knows this is the absolute final opportunity to act. If they wait another day, they will simply perish in the dark. There will not be enough men to lift the heavy timber. Odysseus steps slowly out of the protective shadows. He carries the heavy goatskin pouch filled with Apollo's dark wine. He approaches the giant, his hands perfectly steady. He pours the thick, unmixed vintage into a massive wooden bowl. He offers the bowl upward into the flickering firelight. He speaks with a voice of forced, absolute calm. He suggests the giant wash down his brutal meal with human wine. Polyphemus looks down at the tiny warrior with a dark sneer. He takes the massive bowl and raises it to his lips. He drinks the dark liquid in a single massive gulp. The giant freezes, his single eye widening in pure astonishment. He has never tasted anything like this potent, divine vintage. It is a liquid fire that burns with the sweetness of dark honey. It sends a sudden, heavy warmth rushing through his massive frame. He demands another bowl, his voice slurring slightly. Odysseus pours a second measure, and then a third. The incredibly potent wine begins to cloud the giant's primitive mind. A strange, drunken warmth spreads across his terrifying features. He looks down at Odysseus with a heavy, unfocused gaze. He demands to know the name of this generous guest. He promises a special gift in return for this wonderful drink. Odysseus looks directly into the massive, glassy eye. His brilliant, calculating mind executes its finest deception. He speaks clearly and distinctly into the quiet cavern. He says that his name is Nobody. It is the name his father gave him, and the name his men use. The giant laughs, a sound like boulders tumbling down a mountain. He accepts this strange name without any hesitation. He delivers his dark, promised gift with a drunken grin. He tells Nobody that he will be eaten last of all. With those chilling words, the massive giant simply collapses. He falls backward onto the stone floor with a deafening crash. The deep, rumbling snores begin almost immediately. He is completely paralyzed by the divine, undiluted wine. The moment of absolute truth has finally arrived. Odysseus signals to his remaining, trembling men. They move silently through the shadows to the pile of dung. They uncover the heavy, sharpened olive wood stake. They carry it quietly to the dying embers of the fire. They thrust the cruel point back into the glowing red coals. They wait until the wood glows with the intensity of a dying star. The cavern is completely silent except for the giant's heavy breathing. Odysseus positions his men carefully around the sleeping behemoth. They lift the massive timber together, their muscles straining. They take a collective breath in the heavy, smoke-filled air. Then they drive the burning stake directly downward. It plunges deep into the center of the giant's single eye. The silence of the cavern is shattered by a sound of pure agony. It is a scream that physically shakes the foundation of the island. The giant thrashes wildly, blindly clawing at his ruined face. The Greeks scramble backward into the deepest recesses of the cave. They press themselves into the narrow cracks of the stone walls. Polyphemus tears the burning stake from his eye with a roar. He hurls the bloody timber across the cavern in blind rage. His screams echo out into the cold mountain night. The terrible sound carries across the high, desolate peaks. It wakes the other Cyclopes sleeping in their neighboring caves. Heavy footsteps begin to shake the earth outside. Massive voices call out through the darkness, demanding answers. They gather outside the heavy stone boulder, deeply concerned. They ask who is attacking their brother in the middle of the night. Polyphemus roars his answer through the thick stone door. He screams that Nobody is killing him. He shouts that Nobody is using treachery to destroy him. The giants outside pause in total confusion. If Nobody is attacking him, they reason it must be a divine sickness. It must be a punishment directly from their father, Poseidon. They offer no help, telling him to pray to the gods for relief. Slowly, the heavy footsteps outside begin to recede. The other giants return to their cold, isolated caves. Odysseus's brilliant deception has worked perfectly. The immediate threat of reinforcements has been completely neutralized. But the victory offers no real comfort in the dark. The primary problem remains utterly unsolved. Polyphemus is now entirely blind and consumed by burning rage. He gropes his way to the massive stone boulder. He feels the heavy rock with his massive, bleeding hands. With a groan of effort, he pushes the boulder slightly aside. He leaves just enough room for his flock to exit in the morning. Then, he sits heavily in the narrow opening. He spreads his massive arms wide across the gap. He intends to feel everything that tries to leave his cave. He will crush any Greek who attempts to slip past him. The night stretches out in agonizing, slow motion. The blinded giant moans in the darkness, a sound of terrifying misery. The sheep shuffle nervously in their massive wooden pens. They smell the heavy metallic scent of blood in the air. The remaining Greeks sit completely motionless in the shadows. They do not dare to whisper or even shift their weight. They watch the massive silhouette of the giant blocking the door. The cold night air slips through the narrow crack in the stone. It does nothing to clear the heavy stench of the cavern. Odysseus closes his eyes and forces his mind to focus. Violence has achieved everything it possibly can. The giant cannot be killed, or they will never move the stone. He cannot be bypassed because his massive arms block the only exit. The situation requires a completely different kind of strategy. It requires a level of cunning that borders on the divine. Odysseus listens to the nervous bleating of the massive sheep. He studies their thick, heavy coats in the dim starlight. These are not normal animals. They are massive, powerful beasts with thick, curling fleeces. An idea begins to form in the quiet darkness of his mind. It is an incredibly dangerous, desperate plan. It relies entirely on the giant's remaining sense of touch. Odysseus waits until the first grey light of dawn approaches. He creeps silently toward the heavy wooden pens. He motions for his terrified men to follow him. He begins to gather the supple willow twigs used for the giant's bedding. He works with absolute, breathless silence. The dawn is coming, and with it, their final chance for survival. The giant shifts heavily in the doorway, groaning in pain. The true test of their escape is about to begin. The grey light of dawn spills through the narrow crack in the stone. Odysseus works with quiet, desperate speed in the shadows. He gathers the supple willow twigs from the giant's heavy bedding. He moves silently among the massive, restless rams. He binds his terrified men directly beneath the bellies of the animals. He ties 3 sheep together to conceal a single warrior. The thick, heavy wool hides them completely. In the gloom, they hang suspended in the stifling, musky heat of the beasts. They grip the rough fleece with blistered, aching hands. Odysseus selects the largest, most magnificent ram for himself. He curls his body tightly beneath its massive torso. He digs his fingers deep into the dense, curling wool. The flock begins to press eagerly toward the stone door. They bleat loudly, desperate to reach the morning pastures. Polyphemus sits heavily in the narrow opening. He groans in terrible, echoing agony. His massive, bleeding hands reach out into the cold air. He runs his fingers over the broad back of every sheep that passes. The men hold their breath as the giant's hands brush past them. The heavy fingers never reach beneath the animals' bellies. One by one, the surviving Greeks slip past the blind monster. They carry the paralyzing fear of absolute discovery. Odysseus waits in the darkness, suspended beneath the final ram. It is the leader of the flock, a beast of immense pride and size. The massive ram steps slowly toward the stone entrance. The giant's bloody hands fall heavily upon its thick back. Polyphemus stops the great animal in the narrow doorway. Odysseus freezes, his heart hammering against the ram's ribs. The giant leans down, his voice thick with sorrow and pain. He speaks gently to his favorite, most loyal beast. He asks why the great ram is the last to leave the cave today. Usually, it leads the flock proudly across the high meadows. He wonders if the animal is grieving for its master's ruined eye. He wishes the ram could speak and reveal where nobody is hiding. He promises to dash the Greek's brains against the stone floor. Odysseus hangs mere inches below the giant's reaching hands. He does not dare to exhale. He stares at the stone floor, waiting for the inevitable discovery. Finally, Polyphemus releases the heavy fleece with a deep sigh. He allows the magnificent ram to walk out into the bright sunlight. The cool morning air rushes over Odysseus's sweat-drenched face. He waits until they are safely down the rugged mountain path. Only then does he release his agonizing grip on the wool. He drops softly onto the damp, cold grass. He quickly unties his trembling, exhausted companions. They do not celebrate or speak a single word. They quietly drive the massive, stolen sheep toward the hidden cove. They load the heavy animals onto the waiting black ship. The remaining crew weeps with joy at their sudden return. But they also see the terrible, empty spaces where others once stood. Odysseus orders them to man the heavy wooden oars immediately. They push the vessel quietly away from the cursed shore. They row with the desperate, burning strength of hunted prey. The ship glides swiftly through the deep coastal waters. They are finally free of the towering, jagged cliffs. But the intoxicating rush of survival is a highly dangerous drug. It clouds the brilliant, calculating mind of the Ithacan king. He has just defeated a monstrous son of the sea god. A fierce, uncontrollable pride rises rapidly in his chest. He stands at the high stern of the fleeing ship. He looks back at the blind giant standing on the distant cliff. Odysseus cannot resist the ultimate, fatal urge to boast. He cups his hands and shouts across the churning water. He taunts the defeated monster with cruel, ringing words. He declares that if anyone ever asks who destroyed his eye, they should know it was not a coward named Nobody. It was Odysseus, the sacker of cities, the king of Ithaca. The true name echoes sharply against the cold stone mountains. It is the greatest, most devastating mistake of his entire life. Polyphemus hears the hated name echoing on the wind. He rips the jagged top off a nearby mountain peak. He hurls the massive boulder blindly toward the sound of the voice. The enormous rock crashes into the sea just ahead of the ship. The impact creates a massive, surging tidal wave. The wall of water pushes the ship violently backward. It drives them dangerously close to the rocky shore once again. The men row frantically, fighting the unnatural, crushing current. They narrowly escape being dashed against the iron cliffs. But the true damage is already far more than physical. Polyphemus raises his bleeding face toward the heavy grey sky. He calls out to his father, Poseidon, the ancient lord of the deep. He prays a dark, terrifying curse upon the king of Ithaca. He begs that Odysseus never reach his beloved home, or if the fates decree, he must eventually return. Let him arrive broken, years late, and entirely alone. Let him lose every single one of his loyal companions. Let him find only sorrow and violent trouble in his own house. The sea god hears the agonizing prayer of his blinded son. A cold, heavy shadow falls across the deep waters of the Mediterranean. The ocean itself becomes their permanent, unforgiving enemy. They sail quickly away from the island of the Cyclopes, but they carry a divine death sentence in their wake. The curse of Poseidon hangs over the black ship like an invisible shroud. The men cannot see it, but they can feel its heavy presence. They sail for days through waters that seem unnervingly quiet. The steady, rhythmic sound of the oars is the only noise. The men eat the giant's stolen sheep in total silence. They drink the dark wine, but it offers them no real comfort. The traumatic memory of the Cyclops is burned into their minds. They jump at every sudden shift in the ocean wind. They scan the dark horizon with hollow, exhausted eyes. Odysseus stands at the steering oar, carrying a terrible burden. He knows his own pride has doomed his loyal crew. The sea is no longer a neutral, indifferent pathway. It is a conscious, hostile entity actively hunting them. But the gods play a long, intricate game with mortal lives. The ocean remains calm, lulling them into a false sense of security. Slowly, a new island emerges from the morning mist. It rises from the deep blue water like a brilliant green jewel. This is the legendary island of Aeaea. It is a place where the boundaries of reality are dangerously thin. As the ship drifts closer, Odysseus studies the shoreline. He sees no jagged cliffs or giant caves. He sees beautiful rolling meadows locked in eternal spring. He sees ancient groves of heavily laden fruit trees. In the distance, a thin column of white smoke rises into the sky. Smoke means a hearth fire. A hearth fire means civilization, warmth, and potentially food. Before Troy, the men would have cheered at the sight. Now, the thin grey line of smoke fills them with cold dread. They remember the peaceful meadows of the Lotus Eaters. They remember the horrific cave of the giant. Paradise is often just a beautifully decorated trap. Odysseus refuses to risk his entire crew on a single gamble. He divides his surviving men into two equal, heavily armed groups. He will command one group and remain with the ship. His most trusted, cautious commander, Eurylochus, will lead the other. They place two marked stones into a heavy bronze helmet. They shake the helmet until one stone leaps out onto the deck. The dangerous task of exploration falls to Eurylochus. He selects 22 men, their faces pale with anxiety. They grip their spears tightly as they step onto the soft sand. They begin the long, quiet march toward the rising smoke. The path leads them away from the comforting sound of the sea. It winds through a dense, ancient forest of strange, glowing flora. The flowers here emit a soft, unnatural light in the shadows. The air smells strongly of crushed herbs and heavy incense. Suddenly, the dense undergrowth begins to rustle. The Greeks raise their bronze shields, forming a defensive wall. They wait for the sudden charge of a wild boar or a monstrous giant. But the creatures that emerge from the forest defy all logic. They are mountain lions and massive timber wolves. The apex predators of the ancient world completely surround the men. Yet the animals do not bare their teeth or prepare to strike. They walk slowly, approaching the terrifying warriors like gentle house dogs. They rub their heavy heads against the men's armored legs. They stand on their hind legs and beg for attention. Eurylochus looks into the golden eyes of a massive lion. He does not see the cold, indifferent stare of a wild beast. He sees an agonizing, profound human sorrow. The animals look at the men with desperate, intelligent grief. It is as if they are desperately trying to warn the soldiers to turn back. A deep chill runs down the spine of every Greek warrior. They realize these are not natural animals at all. They push past the weeping predators and continue down the path. The dense forest suddenly opens into a perfectly cultivated valley. In the center of the valley stands a magnificent palace. It is built of smooth, polished stone that seems to capture the sunlight. The walls glow with a warm, inviting radiance. It is far more beautiful than the rough fortresses of Greece. From deep inside, the palace comes a sound of pure enchantment. It is a woman's voice, singing a melody of impossible beauty. The notes weave through the air like invisible threads of gold. The song is accompanied by the rhythmic clatter of a massive loom. Eurylochus halts his men at the towering, polished doors. He listens to the divine music with deep, paralyzing suspicion. The men call out softly, announcing their arrival. The beautiful singing immediately stops. The great doors swing open to reveal the master of the island. She is Circe, a powerful sorceress and a direct daughter of the sun god. She is tall, impossibly graceful, and devastatingly beautiful. Her long hair catches the sunlight like spun gold. Her eyes hold the dark, terrifying depth of ancient magic. She welcomes the weary soldiers with a bright, flawless smile. She invites them into her grand halls to rest their aching bones. The soldiers, exhausted and hungry, eagerly follow her inside. They forget the weeping lions in the forest. They forget the heavy warnings of their commander. But Eurylochus remains standing outside the grand doorway. His instincts scream that this absolute perfection is a carefully crafted illusion. He hides himself in the deep shadows of the outer portico. He watches silently through the massive open doors. The interior of the palace is a masterpiece of magical wealth. Tapestries shift and change color as the light touches them. Beautiful, silent servants guide the men to carved wooden chairs. They place golden plates of rich, heavily spiced food before them. Circe herself moves gracefully among the rugged warriors. She carries a large silver pitcher and golden cups. She pours a beautiful, sparkling wine for each of her guests. The wine smells of sweet honey and blooming flowers. But beneath the sweetness, it carries a dark, hidden poison. It is laced with ancient, mind-altering herbs. The men drink the wine eagerly, desperate to forget their pain. As the liquid hits their stomachs, a terrifying silence falls over the room. The magic works with horrifying, absolute speed. Eurylochus watches from the shadows in complete disbelief. The faces of his loyal companions begin to warp and stretch. Their sun-baked skin turns thick, coarse, and deeply bristled. Their armored hands twist and fuse into hard, split hooves. Their bronze weapons clatter loudly onto the polished stone floor. They fall to their hands and knees, their bodies completely transformed. The 22 proud Greek warriors are gone. In their place, a herd of massive, grunting swine roots around the hall. But the most horrific part of Circe's magic is not physical. She leaves their human minds completely intact. They know exactly who they are. They remember their homes, their families, and their desperate journey. They simply cannot speak, weep, or hold a sword to defend themselves. They are trapped forever in the bodies of common beasts. Circe looks down at her new creations and laughs. It is not a chaotic, villainous cackle. It is the calm, satisfied laugh of an artist completing a canvas. She believes that men are fundamentally base and greedy creatures. She has simply made their physical forms match their inner nature. She casually strikes the animals with a slender, golden wand. She herds them out the back of the palace like ordinary livestock. She drives them into muddy wooden pens behind the beautiful estate. They join dozens of other transformed sailors from long-lost ships. Eurylochus watches his friends driven into the mud. His mind shatters under the weight of this impossible reality. He turns and sprints blindly back into the dark forest. He runs past the weeping lions and the glowing flowers. He tears through the undergrowth, gasping for breath. He reaches the white beach where Odysseus waits by the ship. Eurylochus collapses into the sand, his chest heaving violently. He is completely hysterical, unable to form a coherent sentence. Odysseus grips the commander's shoulders, demanding a clear report. Slowly, the horrific, impossible truth spills from the broken man's lips. The men are gone. They have been erased from the world of men by a smiling witch. A heavy, absolute silence falls over the remaining crew. The monsters of the sea are one thing, but magic that steals a man's very humanity is a terror beyond words. Eurylochus drops to his knees on the beach. He grasps Odysseus by the legs, weeping like a child. He begs the king to launch the ship immediately. He pleads with him to abandon the lost men and flee the cursed island. It is the only logical choice for survival. But Odysseus looks toward the rising column of smoke in the hills. He is a king. He is the man who brought these soldiers across the sea. He will not abandon them to rot in a magical pigpen. He gently pushes his commander away. He straps his heavy bronze sword around his waist. He takes up his long ashwood spear. He turns his back on the safety of the black ship. He walks alone into the strange, glowing forest. He marches directly toward a sorceress who has never been defeated. The forest canopy closes tightly over the king of Ithaca. The sunlight fractures into thin, dusty beams through the heavy leaves. He walks with the deliberate, measured stride of a veteran soldier. He expects a violent ambush to materialize at any moment. The strange, weeping predators watch him from the deep brush. But the lions and wolves do not attack. They simply let him pass into the deeper, quieter shadows. Suddenly, the dense undergrowth on the path parts completely. A solitary figure steps directly into the dappled sunlight. It is not a beast or an armored guard. It is a young man of impossible, radiant beauty. He carries a strange wooden staff twined with carved serpents. Small, delicate wings flutter silently at the heels of his sandals. The air around him hums with an undeniable electric authority. This is no ordinary mortal traveler wandering the woods. It is Hermes, the ancient messenger of the Olympian gods. He looks at Odysseus with a mixture of pity and deep respect. He speaks with a voice that resonates comfortably in the chest. He warns the king that sheer courage is leading him into a trap. A bronze sword cannot cut through ancient, divine magic. If Odysseus drinks the sorceress's wine, he will share his men's fate. The god kneels gracefully and digs his fingers into the dark soil. He pulls a single, small plant directly from the earth. It is a strange herb entirely unknown to mortal herbalists. It possesses a pitch-black root and a flower of blinding white. The ancient gods call this powerful plant moly. Hermes presses the bitter root into the king's rough, calloused hand. He instructs Odysseus to eat the root before entering the palace. It will act as an absolute, invisible shield against Circe's dark arts. But the divine messenger offers a second, vital instruction. When the poisoned wine fails, Circe will strike with her golden wand. In that exact fraction of a second, Odysseus must attack. He must press his bronze blade directly to her immortal throat. He must force her to swear the great oath of the gods. It is a sacred binding that no immortal dares to break. With these final words, the divine messenger simply dissolves. He vanishes into the morning mist like a fading dream. Odysseus stands alone on the path with the strange white flower. He lifts the bitter, black root to his lips and swallows it. A sudden rush of heat spreads deeply through his chest and limbs. The heavy, intoxicating spell of the forest instantly lifts. His mind becomes razor-sharp and perfectly clear. He continues his solitary march toward the glowing stone palace. He arrives at the great bronze doors and calls out his presence. The enchanting music inside ceases almost immediately. The heavy doors swing wide to reveal the smiling sorceress. Circe welcomes the solitary warrior with flawless, terrifying grace. She leads him into the grand hall where his men were lost. She seats him in a beautifully carved wooden chair. She brings the heavy golden chalice filled with dark wine. She watches him closely with ancient, calculating eyes. Odysseus takes the heavy cup in his scarred hands. He raises it to his lips and drinks deeply. The wine is thick with honey and heavy with dark, magical herbs. Circe steps forward, a triumphant smile spreading across her perfect face. She raises her slender, golden wand and strikes his shoulder. She commands him to go to the mud and join his miserable friends. A heavy, breathless silence falls over the magnificent, glowing hall. Odysseus does not fall to his hands and knees. His sun-baked skin does not turn to coarse, heavy bristles. The magical flower of the gods holds perfectly firm. The ancient poison is completely neutralized in his mortal veins. He remains a proud, highly dangerous king of Ithaca. Circe steps backward, her eyes wide with sudden, absolute shock. In all her centuries of ruling this island, no mortal has ever resisted her. Her magic has always been ancient and utterly flawless. Before she can utter another desperate spell, the king moves. Odysseus draws his heavy bronze sword with blinding speed. He lunges aggressively across the polished stone floor. He catches the immortal sorceress against the massive stone wall. He presses the cold, sharp edge of his blade directly against her throat. He looks into her ancient eyes with absolute, unyielding fury. Circe realizes instantly who is holding the bronze sword. She remembers a faded, ancient prophecy spoken by Hermes long ago. It foretold the arrival of a brilliant, unstoppable Greek wanderer. It spoke of a man whose mind could not be broken by trickery or magic. She drops her golden wand onto the polished stone floor. She completely surrenders to the man of many wiles. She begs him to sheath his blade and share her palace in peace. But Odysseus refuses to lower the heavy bronze weapon. He demands the sacred, binding oath of the immortal gods. He forces her to swear by the highest powers of the cosmos. She must promise to never weave another harmful spell against him. She speaks the heavy, ancient words of the binding oath. The very air in the room shifts as the divine contract is sealed. Only then does Odysseus slowly lower his bronze sword. The sorceress is now bound entirely by her own words. The immediate danger has finally passed. The heavy bronze blade slides back into its leather sheath, but Odysseus remains entirely focused and completely on guard. He has secured his own safety with the divine oath, but his mission on this beautiful island is not yet complete. He looks at the immortal sorceress standing quietly before him. He demands the immediate release of his trapped companions. He refuses to accept her hospitality until he sees their human faces. Circe nods slowly, honoring the sacred weight of her binding oath. She walks gracefully out the heavy bronze doors of the palace. She leads the Greek king toward the wooden pens in the back. The massive swine grunt and shuffle in the thick, foul mud. They look up at their king with desperate, intelligent human eyes. It is a tragic, unnatural sight that twists the heart. Circe steps calmly into the center of the muddy enclosure. She speaks a new string of ancient, melodic words. She rubs a strange, fragrant ointment onto the coarse skin of the beasts. The magic takes hold with breathtaking, miraculous speed. The thick bristles melt away into smooth, sun-baked skin. The heavy hooves separate back into human hands and fingers. The men stand up slowly in the damp, dark earth. They are no longer the battered, exhausted soldiers who arrived. The reversal of the magic leaves them completely rejuvenated. They appear taller, stronger, and noticeably younger than before. They weep openly as they throw their arms around their king. The sheer relief of returning to human form is completely overwhelming. Odysseus embraces his loyal friends with genuine, profound joy. He immediately sends a messenger back to the quiet, sandy beach. The rest of the terrified crew is brought up to the palace. Even the deeply cautious Eurylochus finally steps into the glowing halls. What follows is a period of intense, unprecedented healing. The men are bathed in polished silver tubs of warm water. They are dressed in fine, incredibly soft woolen tunics. They sit down to banquets of roasted meats and perfect vintage wine. The brutal, lingering trauma of the sea begins to wash away. The island of Aeir is a place completely untouched by ordinary time. It exists in a perpetual, golden, endless afternoon. There are no freezing winter winds or violent maritime storms here. There is only warmth, absolute physical comfort, and endless abundance. Circe proves to be an incredibly generous and fascinating host. She shares her vast, ancient knowledge of the mortal world. She understands the deep, isolating burden of exceptional leadership. Odysseus finds himself drawn to her brilliant, immortal mind. For the first time since leaving the bloody shores of Troy, he rests. He lowers the heavy, psychological shield he has carried for years. The days blur seamlessly into comfortable, quiet weeks. The weeks stretch effortlessly into warm, peaceful months. The fierce, burning desire to reach Ithaca slowly begins to fade. It is replaced by a soft, comfortable complacency. The extreme luxury of the palace acts like a second, slower poison. It does not turn them into beasts, but it dulls their mortal drive. An entire year slips away in the golden halls of the sorceress. A full year of human life is swallowed by divine hospitality. In the ancient world, a year is a massive span of time. Sons grow older, kingdoms shift, and wives lose hope. But mortal men are not built for eternal, unchanging perfection. The human spirit requires struggle, purpose, and a sense of forward motion. One evening, as the sun dips below the calm sea, the spell finally breaks. Eurylochus and the senior crewmen approach their resting king. They find him sitting quietly in the beautiful, fragrant palace gardens. They speak to him with a gentle but absolute firmness. They remind him of the harsh, rocky shores of Ithaca. They speak the names of the wives and children waiting across the water. They tell him it is finally time to leave this golden cage. The words strike Odysseus like cold water against bare skin. The heavy fog of comfort instantly lifts from his brilliant mind. He remembers exactly who he is and what he must do. That night, he goes to Circe in her quiet, torchlit chambers. He asks for her blessing to finally leave the island. The sorceress looks at him with deep, understanding sorrow. She is immortal, but she knows she cannot hold a mortal heart forever. She agrees to help him prepare his black ship for departure, but she delivers a warning that freezes the blood in his veins. The route home is not a simple, straight line across the Aegean. The terrible anger of Poseidon still blocks the standard shipping lanes. To find his way back to the world of the living, he must seek the dead. He must speak with the spirit of the blind prophet Tiresias. Circe tells him he must sail to the absolute edge of the known world. He must cross the deep, freezing waters of the river ocean. He must sail directly into the sunless realm of Hades. Ancient Greeks believed the underworld was a place of permanent shadows. It was not a place for living, breathing mortals to visit. It was a one-way destination at the absolute end of a mortal life. To go there while still breathing defies the natural order of the cosmos. Circe explains the terrifying, ancient ritual he must perform. He must dig a trench where the underground rivers meet. He must pour libations of honey, milk, and dark blood. The blood will attract the pale, fluttering ghosts of the dead, but he must hold them back with his heavy bronze sword. He must only let the blind prophet drink and speak. The weight of this divine instruction settles heavily on the king. He has survived trench warfare, divine storms, and man-eating giants. But now, he must face the ultimate terror of human existence. He must look directly into the face of death itself. The morning of their departure arrives, cold and wrapped in heavy ocean mist. The heavy, white mist of the morning completely swallows the island of Aea. The golden palace of the sorceress vanishes into the damp fog. The black ship cuts smoothly through the cold, grey water. A strange, unnatural wind fills the heavy square sail. It is a final, parting gift from Circe. The wind pushes the vessel with relentless, steady purpose. The men sit at their wooden benches in absolute silence. They do not sing the ancient working songs of the sea. They do not speak of the homes they are trying to reach. They are paralyzed by a deep, existential dread. They know exactly where this supernatural wind is taking them. They are sailing entirely off the edge of the mortal map. As the hours pass, the very nature of the world begins to change. The bright, vibrant blue of the Mediterranean completely fades. The water turns the color of beaten lead. The sky above them slowly loses all of its warmth and light. The bright, life-giving sun simply ceases to exist here. It is replaced by a heavy, permanent twilight. Thick, impenetrable clouds hang low over the dark ocean. The air grows unnaturally cold and deeply stagnant. This is the distant, sunless realm of the Cimmerians. It is a place permanently shrouded in damp, suffocating fog. It is the absolute boundary line of human existence. No living man has ever sailed this far and returned to tell the tale. The ship glides forward into the freezing, oppressive darkness. Slowly, the sound of churning water reaches their ears. It is not the rhythmic crashing of ocean waves. It is the chaotic, swirling roar of massive rivers colliding. They have reached the deep, dark currents of the river ocean. A desolate, terrifying shoreline slowly emerges from the mist. There are no glowing flowers or green meadows here. The beach is composed entirely of coarse, pitch-black sand. The sand absorbs all light and offers absolutely nothing back. Beyond the dark shore lies a thick grove of dead, leafless trees. Ancient willows and pale poplars reach up like skeletal fingers. There are no birds singing in the twisted, barren branches. There is no wind rustling through the heavy, stagnant air. The silence here is heavier than stone. It is the crushing, absolute silence of the grave. Odysseus orders the men to beach the black ship on the dark sand. The wooden hull scrapes harshly against the coarse black beach. The sound echoes loudly in the unnerving quiet. The men are completely frozen in their places, terrified to disembark. They look into the dark, tangled woods with hollow eyes. But Odysseus knows he cannot hesitate. He steps over the wooden side of the vessel. His leather sandals sink deep into the cold, black earth. He carries his heavy bronze sword and the sacrificial offerings. He walks alone toward the roaring confluence of the dark rivers. He finds the exact spot where the violent currents violently collide. This is the hidden gateway to the underworld of Hades. He kneels on the freezing, damp earth. He draws his bronze sword from its heavy leather sheath. The metal gleams coldly in the permanent twilight. He begins to dig a deep trench directly into the black soil. The physical exertion is the only thing keeping him warm. His breath forms thick white clouds in the freezing air. When the pit is precisely the size of a man's forearm, he stops. He carefully pours the sacred libations into the dark earth. First, he pours a mixture of sweet honey and fresh milk. Next, he pours a measure of rich, dark wine. Finally, he pours clear, cold water over the offerings. He sprinkles pale barley across the dark, soaking soil. He speaks the heavy, ancient prayers of the dead. He promises the ghosts that he will honor them when he returns to Ithaca. He vows to sacrifice his finest barren heifer in his own halls. The prayers echo into the deep, suffocating fog. Then he signals to his terrified, trembling men on the beach. They bring forward a magnificent black ram and a black ewe. These animals are the final, vital component of Circe's instructions. Odysseus holds the struggling animals over the dark trench. He raises his heavy bronze blade. With a swift, practiced motion, he draws the sword across their throats. The dark, steaming blood pours directly into the cold earth. It mixes with the honey, the milk, and the wine. The metallic, heavy scent of blood fills the stagnant air. The animals collapse onto the black sand, their life completely gone. Odysseus steps back from the edge of the pooling trench. He keeps his bronze sword drawn and tightly gripped. He waits in the freezing, absolute silence of the underworld. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happens. The dark blood simply soaks slowly into the dead earth. Then the temperature plunges with terrifying, sudden speed. The heavy mist begins to swirl and violently churn. The shadows in the dead forest begin to detach from the trees. They do not walk or run like living men. They drift over the black sand like smoke caught in a gentle breeze. A sound rises from the dark edges of the forest. It is a high, thin, collective wailing that chills the blood. It sounds like dry leaves skittering across cold, hard stone. The spirits of the dead are emerging from the deep gloom. They are drawn violently by the heavy scent of the fresh blood. In the ancient Greek mind, the dead have no real substance. They are pale, hollow, memoryless echoes of their former selves. They exist in a state of perpetual, mindless drifting. Only the warm blood of a sacrifice can temporarily restore their minds. It gives them the fleeting strength to speak and remember their lives. Thousands of shifting, translucent forms press toward the trench. They swarm forward with a terrifying, desperate hunger. Odysseus sees the spirits of young brides and hardened old men. He sees warriors still bearing the horrific, gaping wounds that killed them. Their phantom armor is permanently stained with spectral blood. He sees young children who died far too soon. The sheer volume of the dead is completely overwhelming. They crowd around the edge of the pit, wailing and reaching out. Their hollow eyes are fixed entirely on the pooling blood. A wave of pure, absolute panic washes over the brave king. The terror of this place is worse than any battlefield he has ever known. But he forces his shaking hand to remain perfectly steady. He levels the sharp tip of his bronze sword at the advancing horde. He sweeps the heavy blade through the freezing air. The spirits recoil from the cold bronze with shrieking cries. They flutter backward like frightened, translucent birds. Odysseus must hold the perimeter at all costs. He cannot let any spirit drink the blood until the prophet arrives. He stands his ground against the endless tide of the dead. The physical toll of the terror begins to weigh on his muscles. Then, a familiar face separates from the swirling mass of ghosts. It is a young, tragic spirit that Odysseus knows well. It is Elpenor, the youngest member of his own crew. Odysseus stares at the ghost in complete, uncomprehending shock. He had left the young man alive and asleep on Circe's island. The pale spirit approaches the edge of the bronze sword. He looks at his king with deep, lingering sorrow and reproach. The ghost's voice is impossibly thin, like a whisper across a vast distance. He explains the tragic, senseless nature of his recent death. He had fallen from the high roof of Circe's palace in a drunken stupor. His neck had broken on the hard stone stairs below. In their frantic haste to leave, the crew had never noticed he was missing. His body lies completely unburied and entirely unmourned on the Golden Island. In the ancient world, an unburied body is a horrific tragedy. The soul cannot find true rest without the proper funeral rites. Elpenor begs his king to return to the island of Aea. He asks for his body to be burned with his armor. He asks for a burial mound to be raised on the shore of the sea. Odysseus feels a crushing, heavy wave of guilt and sorrow. He promises the weeping ghost that he will perform the sacred rites. He gives his absolute word as a king and a commander. Elpenor nods slowly, his pale form retreating back into the swirling mist. But there is no time to mourn the tragic loss. Another spirit drifts toward the edge of the dark trench. This one stops the breath completely in Odysseus's chest. His bronze sword trembles violently in his grip. His knees threaten to buckle beneath him in the cold sand. It is the pale, hovering spirit of his own mother, Anticlea. When he left the shores of Ithaca 10 years ago, she was alive. She had stood on the rocky cliffs, waving goodbye to his black ship. He had no idea that she had crossed into the sunless realm. She reaches her translucent arms out toward her weeping son. The pain of seeing her here is a physical, tearing agony. He desperately wants to drop his sword and embrace her. He wants to let her drink the blood and hear her comforting voice. But the strict, terrifying instructions of the sorceress hold him back. He must wait for the blind prophet. He turns his face away from his mother's reaching hands. He forces his trembling arm to remain locked in place. The bronze blade stays firmly between his mother and the dark blood. The agony of denying her is a physical weight on his chest. But he knows the rules of this terrifying, sunless realm. The prophecy must absolutely come first. Finally, a different kind of spirit emerges from the swirling mist. It does not drift aimlessly like the other hollow ghosts. This spirit moves with slow, deliberate, ancient purpose. He is bent with unimaginable age. He leans heavily on a staff of solid gold. The golden staff emits a faint, warm light in the darkness. This is Tiresias of Thebes, the greatest prophet of the ancient world. Even in death, his mind remains perfectly intact. His inner vision is completely undiminished by the grave. Odysseus slowly lowers the tip of his bronze sword. He steps back from the edge of the dark, pooling trench. He allows the ancient prophet to kneel in the freezing sand. Tiresias drinks the dark blood of the sacrificed animals. As he drinks, his pale form gathers sudden, startling solidity. When he speaks, his voice carries the immense weight of centuries. He addresses the king of Ithaca with absolute, terrifying clarity. He confirms that the journey home will be long and brutal. The god of the sea is actively hunting the black ship. Poseidon will make every mile a trial of supreme endurance. But the prophet offers a narrow, dangerous path to survival. He speaks of an island named Thrinacia. This is where the sun god pastures his magnificent, immortal cattle. Tiresias delivers a strict, absolute commandment. The men must leave these sacred animals completely unharmed. If they show restraint, they may eventually reach the shores of Ithaca. But if they harm a single beast, total destruction is guaranteed. The ship will be shattered into floating splinters. The entire crew will drown in the dark water. Odysseus alone will survive the terrible, divine vengeance. He will arrive home years late, broken, and completely alone. He will travel on a stranger's ship, carrying no wealth, and he will find his own palace occupied by arrogant, violent men. These suitors will be consuming his estate and courting his wife. Tiresias paints a grim, exhausting picture of the future. Even returning home will not bring immediate peace. Odysseus must fight a bloody war in his own dining hall. And even after that victory, he must leave again. He must carry a wooden oar far inland. He must walk until he finds people who know absolutely nothing of the sea. Only there can he make a final peace with Poseidon. The prophet's form begins to fade as the blood loses its power. His final words echo softly into the heavy, stagnant mist. He promises that death will eventually come gently from the sea. It will take Odysseus in his comfortable, prosperous old age. With that final revelation, the golden staff fades into the dark. Tiresias returns to the silent depths of the underworld. Odysseus steps back to the edge of the trench. He finally lowers his sword for the weeping spirit of his mother. Anticlea drifts forward and drinks eagerly from the dark earth. The blood restores her memory and her voice. She looks at her son with desperate, overflowing love. Odysseus asks the questions that have haunted him for a decade. He asks about his aging father and his young son. He asks if his wife has remained faithful in his long absence. Anticlea's answers are a mixture of deep comfort and profound sorrow. Penelope remains a rock of absolute fidelity. She waits by the window, resisting the demands of the arrogant suitors. Telemachus is growing into a brave, capable young man, but his father, Laertes, has retreated to a lonely country farm. The old man sleeps in the dirt, consumed by grief. Then Odysseus asks the most painful question of all. He asks his mother what terrible sickness brought her to this dark realm. Anticlea's translucent face contorts with fresh, spectral tears. She tells him that no disease took her life. It was not the swift arrow of Artemis that struck her down. It was the agonizing, endless wait for his black ship. It was a deeply broken heart that finally killed her. The grief of this revelation shatters the king's composure. He drops his heavy bronze sword into the black sand. He steps forward, desperate to hold his mother one last time. 3 times he reaches out to embrace her. 3 times his arms pass completely through her pale, shifting form. She is nothing but shadows and memory. The physical world can never touch the realm of the dead. She drifts away into the mist, leaving him weeping on the shore. Other famous spirits press forward to drink the remaining blood. The great heroes of the Trojan War emerge from the gloom. Odysseus sees Agamemnon, the former high king of the Greeks. The great commander is a bitter, deeply wounded ghost. He was murdered in his own bath by his treacherous wife. Agamemnon offers a dark, cynical warning to his old friend. He tells Odysseus to trust absolutely no one, not even Penelope. He claims that all women are stained by his own wife's betrayal. Next comes Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived. He had chosen a short, glorious life over a long, quiet one. Odysseus tries to comfort the legendary fighter. He reminds Achilles of his unmatched, eternal glory. But the ghost of Achilles rejects the comfort entirely. He delivers a devastating truth about the reality of death. He says he would rather be a living slave to a poor farmer. He would trade all his eternal glory for one more breath of life. Being a king among the dead is completely worthless. The heroic ideals of Troy suddenly feel incredibly hollow. The sheer volume of the dead begins to completely overwhelm the living. Thousands of shrieking spirits swarm toward the bloody trench. The terror becomes too much for a mortal mind to endure. Odysseus retrieves his sword and retreats to the black sand. He orders his terrified men back into the wooden ship. They push off frantically from the freezing, desolate beach. They row with desperate, blind energy into the heavy fog. The strange, divine wind catches their sail once again. It carries them rapidly away from the edge of the world. They sail back across the dark waters of the river ocean. They return to the vibrant, sunlit world of the living. The golden island of Aea appears on the warming horizon. Circe is waiting for them on the beautiful, white beach. She knows they have looked into the face of absolute despair, but before they can rest, they have a sacred duty to fulfill. They walk down the shoreline to the place where Elpenor fell. They find his broken body exactly as the ghost described. They build a large funeral pyre of dry, fragrant driftwood. They place their young companion gently upon the wood. They lay his bronze armor across his quiet chest. They light the fire and watch the smoke rise into the blue sky. They weep for a friend, lost to a foolish, senseless accident. When the flames finally burn down to white ash, they build a mound. They pile heavy stones over the remains to mark the grave. On the very top of the mound, they plant his wooden rowing oar. It will stand forever as a monument to a sailor far from home. The heavy debt to the dead is finally paid. That evening, they feast one last time in Circe's glowing halls. They eat rich meat and drink sweet, dark wine. The warmth of the fire chases away the lingering chill of Hades. But as the men sleep, Circe draws Odysseus aside. She tells him that Tiresias only provided the final destination. He did not explain the immediate horrors waiting on the path. The sorceress looks deeply into the king's eyes. She tells him that the trials of the sea are far from over. Tomorrow, they must sail into a narrow, inescapable strait. They are about to face monsters far worse than the Cyclopes. The fire burns low in the grand hall of Aea. The rest of the crew is sleeping soundly, exhausted by their grief. But Odysseus sits awake with the immortal sorceress. The golden light flickers across Circe's flawless, ancient face. She leans close to the king, her voice barely above a whisper. She warns him that the blind prophet only revealed the final destination. He did not explain the immediate, terrifying gauntlet they must run. The path home is guarded by nightmares older than the gods. First, she says, they will encounter the island of the Sirens. These are creatures of pure, irresistible temptation. They do not hunt with teeth or bronze weapons. They hunt with the sheer, devastating beauty of their voices. They sit in a beautiful green meadow beside the sea, but the tall grass is completely hidden by a horrifying carpet. It is piled high with the bleaching, rotting bones of sailors. No mortal man can hear their song and retain his sanity. The music entirely erases the will to eat, drink, or live. Listeners simply sit on the beach and waste away to nothing. Circe offers a simple, highly effective countermeasure. Odysseus must take a heavy block of soft beeswax. He must knead it in his hands until it is warm and pliable. He must firmly plug the ears of every single crewman. To them, the world must become as silent as a tomb. But Circe knows the brilliant, restless mind of the Ithacan king. She knows his curiosity is a burning, insatiable fire. She tells him that he alone may listen to the divine song, but he must order his men to bind him tightly to the ship's mast. They must use heavy ropes and tie him hand and foot, no matter how violently he struggles or begs for release. They must only row harder and ignore his desperate commands. The sorceress pauses, letting the weight of this instruction settle. Then her dark eyes grow even more serious. Beyond the Sirens, the sea narrows into a terrifying, unnavigable strait. It is a geographical nightmare flanked by sheer, towering cliffs. On one side lies Charybdis. She is a monstrous, churning whirlpool of impossible scale. 3 times a day, she swallows the sea entirely. 3 times a day, she vomits the dark water back out. If the black ship is caught in a spinning vortex, all is lost. Not even the earthshaker Poseidon could save a ship from Charybdis. On the opposite cliff, hidden in a high, dark cave, sits Scylla. She was once a beautiful water nymph, cursed by divine jealousy. Now, she is an unspeakable horror with 6 serpentine necks. Each neck ends in a head filled with 3 rows of razor-sharp teeth. When a ship passes beneath her cave, she strikes like blinding lightning. She will snatch 6 men from the deck in a fraction of a second. Circe forces a cold, agonizing military calculation upon the king. Odysseus must deliberately steer his ship away from the whirlpool. He must steer it directly beneath the high cave of Scylla. He must willingly sacrifice 6 of his best men to save the rest. It is an impossible, soul-crushing choice for a commander. He asks if he can somehow fight off the 6-headed beast. He grips his sword, his tactical mind looking for an angle of attack. But Circe places her soft, immortal hand over his scarred fingers. She tells him that Scylla is an immortal terror. There is absolutely no defense against her strike. To pause and fight is to invite complete destruction. He must simply row through the slaughter and accept the loss. The burden of this knowledge settles heavily on his broad shoulders. He alone knows the bloody toll the next day will demand. The morning dawns with a bright, deceptive clarity. The black ship is fully provisioned and pushed into the gentle surf. Circe stands alone on the white, sandy beach. She is a vision of divine beauty against the green island. She raises her arms, calling upon the ancient winds. A steady, powerful breeze fills the heavy square sail. The ship glides swiftly away from the golden paradise. Odysseus stands at the stern, watching the immortal sorceress shrink from view. He will never see her or her timeless island again. He turns his attention to the dark water ahead. He calls his men together on the wooden deck. He tells them about the island of the Sirens. He explains the beeswax and the strict, absolute orders for his own binding. But he remains completely silent about the horror of Scylla. If he tells them about the six-headed monster, panic will take hold. They will drop their oars and hide beneath the wooden benches. The ship will drift helplessly into the crushing maw of the whirlpool. He must carry the terrible secret of their impending death entirely alone. It is the agonizing, solitary price of ultimate command. The wind carries them swiftly through the deep blue water. Suddenly, the atmosphere around the ship changes completely. The strong, reliable wind dies in an instant. The heavy sail collapses against the mast with a soft sigh. The surface of the sea turns to smooth, highly polished glass. The silence is sudden, deep, and deeply unnerving. Odysseus knows they have reached the edge of the Sirens' domain. He pulls a massive wheel of yellow beeswax from his supplies. He cuts it into small, manageable pieces with his bronze dagger. He kneads the wax in his powerful hands until it is soft and warm. He moves carefully from man to man, pressing the wax deep into their ears. He seals them completely in a world of absolute silence. Then he steps to the heavy wooden mast in the center of the ship. He nods to Eurylochus and the strongest remaining crewmen. They take thick, rough hemp ropes and wrap them around his body. They bind him tightly to the vertical timber. They pull the knots tight, securing his chest, his waist, and his ankles. He tests the bonds, straining his powerful muscles against the ropes. He cannot move an inch. He signals to his deafened crew to man the heavy wooden oars. The men sit at the benches, their faces grim and focused. They dip the long blades into the mirrored, glassy water. The ship slides forward toward a small, incredibly beautiful island. From a distance, it looks like a peaceful, green meadow. But as they draw closer, the horrifying reality becomes clear. The shoreline is composed entirely of shattered human skeletons. The bones are piled high, bleached white by the relentless sun. Faded, rotting scraps of sailcloth flap weakly in the stagnant air. Then the music begins. It does not echo loudly across the open water. It seems to bypass the ears entirely and manifest directly inside the mind. It starts as a soft, impossibly sweet harmonic hum. It is a melody that perfectly aligns with the rhythm of the human heart. The voices of the sirens are flawless, weaving together in absolute perfection. As the ship draws parallel to the island, the lyrics become clear. The song is not a simple, seductive lullaby. It is a highly targeted, deeply personal psychological attack. The sirens do not sing of physical pleasure or endless rest. They sing directly to the deepest weakness of the Ithacan king. They sing to his brilliant, restless, curious intellect. They promise him the ultimate prize of absolute knowledge. They sing of his great victories on the blood-soaked plains of Troy. They claim they know every secret of the vast, ancient world. They promise to explain the hidden, complex workings of the universe. They offer to show him the intricate tapestry of fate itself. They promise that if he listens, he will become the wisest man alive. The temptation is a physical, tearing agony in his chest. His brilliant mind desperately hungers for the answers they promise. He wants to understand the suffering he has endured. He wants to know the precise will of the distant gods. The music builds into a crushing, overwhelming crescendo of beauty. Odysseus completely loses his grip. on reality. The warning of the sorceress evaporates from his mind. The sight of the rotting bones on the beach means absolutely nothing. He strains violently against the thick hemp ropes. The coarse fibers bite deep into his forearms and chest. He screams at his deafened men to untie him. He orders them to turn the ship toward the beautiful, deadly meadow. He threatens them. He begs them. He weeps openly in absolute desperation. He promises them unimaginable wealth if they simply let him go. But the men hear absolutely nothing. They see their proud, stoic king thrashing like a madman against the mast. His face is red, the veins bulging in his strong neck. His frantic gestures only confirm the terrifying power of the unseen enemy. Eurylochus stands up from his rowing bench, holding a fresh coil of rope. He walks calmly to the mast, his eyes averted from the island. He wraps the new ropes over the old ones, pulling them even tighter. He binds the king with brutal, necessary efficiency. Then he returns to his bench and grips his heavy wooden oar. The crew rows with a desperate, unified, blinding speed. They refuse to look at the shoreline or their screaming commander. They keep their eyes locked firmly on the wooden deck of the ship. The vessel cuts smoothly through the dead, glassy water. Slowly, the terrible, beautiful island begins to fall behind them. The flawless harmony of the song grows faint on the heavy air. The promise of absolute knowledge fades into a distant whisper. Eventually, the music dissolves entirely into the silence of the sea. The normal, natural breeze finally returns, catching the heavy sail. Odysseus collapses against the bindings, completely drained of strength. His breathing is ragged, his muscles shaking from the violent exertion. He nods weakly to his crew, indicating the danger has passed. The men carefully pluck the softened beeswax from their ears. They quickly untie the thick, biting ropes from their king. Odysseus rubs his bruised wrists, looking back at the empty horizon. He is the only living man to hear the Sirens' song and survive. But the victory feels incredibly hollow and exhausting. There is no time to recover from the psychological assault. The atmosphere ahead of them is already changing rapidly. The gentle rolling waves give way to a strange, chaotic chop. A low, terrifying roar echoes across the dark water. It sounds like 100 massive waterfalls crashing onto stone. The black ship is approaching a narrow passage between two towering cliffs. The walls of rock rise sheer and smooth into the grey sky. The ocean current suddenly accelerates, pulling the ship forward. The men look ahead, their faces completely drained of color. On the left side of the strait, the sea is tearing itself apart. The water on the left side of the strait is completely unhinged. It is not merely a rough current or a dangerous coastal tide. It is Charybdis. A massive, violent whirlpool spans the entire western channel. It spins with a terrifying, absolute centrifugal force. The vortex reaches down into the very bedrock of the ocean. It sounds like 100 massive waterfalls crashing onto bare stone. If the black ship touches the outer edge of that spin, it is over. The vessel will be dragged down and crushed into splinters. Odysseus stands at the steering oar, gripping the polished wood. He must make the most agonizing decision of his entire life. He must actively choose to sacrifice a portion of his own men. He orders the helmsman to steer hard to the right. He commands the ship to hug the opposite cliff face. The men row with desperate, frantic energy. Their eyes are locked entirely on the roaring whirlpool to their left. They have absolutely no idea what waits in the shadows above them. The right side of the strait is an imposing wall of sheer rock. High above the churning water is a deep, pitch-black cave. It is the ancient, isolated lair of Scylla. Odysseus straps on his heavy bronze chest plate. He grabs his two longest, sharpest ashwood spears. He paces the wooden deck, scanning the high, dark cliff. But the monster is perfectly camouflaged in the deep shadows. The ship glides directly into the narrowest part of the passage. The noise of the whirlpool is deafening, masking all other sounds. Then, the attack comes with blinding, impossible speed. It is faster than the strike of a coiled serpent. 6 massive, Serpentine necks dart down from the high cave. They are covered in thick, heavily armored scales. Before anyone can shout a warning, the heads strike the wooden deck. 6 of the strongest, bravest Greek warriors are instantly seized. Their bronze armor provides absolutely no protection against the razor-sharp teeth. The men are lifted violently into the cold air. They drop their wooden oars, reaching desperately toward the deck. They scream the name of their king one final time. Their voices echo tragically over the roar of the rushing water. Odysseus looks up, completely paralyzed by the sheer horror of the moment. He watches his loyal friends dragged upward into the dark cave. He hears the horrific sounds of the monster feeding in the shadows. It is a memory that will violently haunt him until the day he dies. He grips his bronze spears, his knuckles white with rage. But he cannot throw them into the darkness. He cannot order the ship to stop and fight. If the oarsmen break their rhythm, the ship will drift into the whirlpool. The remaining men will be instantly dragged down to the ocean floor. He is a commander forced to swallow his absolute helplessness. He shouts over the roaring water, ordering the men to keep rowing. He demands that they pull with everything they have left. The survivors weep openly as they bend over the heavy oars. They row with the desperate strength of men, leaving part of their soul behind. The black ship surges forward, fighting the treacherous, pulling current. Slowly, the towering cliffs begin to widen. The deafening roar of the whirlpool begins to fade behind them. The ship bursts out of the narrow, deadly strait. They slide into the calm, open waters of the Mediterranean. But the silence on the wooden deck is heavy and suffocating. There is no celebration of their narrow escape. There is only a deep, profound, hollow grief. 6 empty benches stand as a brutal reminder of the cost. The crew has survived, but they are spiritually broken. They have been systematically stripped of their innocence and their numbers. They sail onward for several days in a state of absolute shock. Odysseus stands alone at the stern, aging visibly under the weight of command. Eventually, the dark, featureless horizon begins to change. A new island slowly emerges from the morning mist. It is not a jagged rock or a terrifying, shadowed forest. It appears incredibly peaceful, bathed in a pure, golden light. The beaches are pristine sweeps of warm, yellow sand. The rolling hills are covered in lush, brilliant green grass. This is Thrinacia, the legendary island of the sun god, Helios. As the ship drifts closer, a strange, beautiful sound drifts across the water. It is the low, contented sound of massive, grazing cattle. The men look toward the shore with hollow, exhausted eyes. They see magnificent beasts moving peacefully on the green hills. The cattle have hides that shimmer like polished bronze. Their heavy horns catch the sunlight, gleaming like pure gold. These are the sacred, immortal herds of the sun itself. The sight of the peaceful island brings no joy to the king of Ithaca. A cold, heavy dread settles deep in his stomach. He remembers the absolute, terrifying warning of the blind prophet. He remembers the final, desperate words of the sorceress Circe. This island is the ultimate, final test of their endurance. If they harm a single sacred cow, they will all perish. He knows his men are starving, traumatized, and dangerously exhausted. Odysseus calls the surviving crew together on the wooden deck. He speaks with all the authority and desperation he can muster. He tells them that they must row past this beautiful shore. He warns them that touching this island guarantees their absolute destruction. But the men are physically and emotionally shattered. They have just survived the unspeakable horror of Scylla. They look at their king with mutinous, deeply exhausted eyes. Eurylochus, his most trusted commander, steps forward. His voice is hollow, laced with the bitter edge of absolute fatigue. He tells Odysseus that the king must be made of solid iron. He claims the men cannot row another mile without rest. They are dying of exhaustion on the hard wooden benches. They simply want to sleep on solid, quiet earth for one night. They promise to leave the sacred cattle entirely alone. Odysseus looks at the desperate, sunken faces of his loyal crew. He knows that pushing them further will result in a total mutiny. With a heavy, reluctant heart, he agrees to land the ship. But he forces every single man to swear a solemn, binding oath. They must promise to eat only the provisions provided by Circe. They must never touch the immortal cattle of the sun. The men swear the oath eagerly, looking at the soft beaches. They drag the black ship onto the warm, golden sand. They collapse onto the shore, finally finding a moment of rest. But the gods are not finished testing the men of Ithaca. That night, the gentle ocean breeze suddenly shifts. The gentle evening breeze completely dies away. It is replaced by a fierce, howling gale. The wind blows violently from the north. It drives massive waves against the pristine beach. Launching the black ship means absolute, immediate destruction. At first, the delay seems like a blessing. The men rest on the warm, golden sand. They eat the rich provisions provided by Circe. They recover from the devastating loss of their friends. But the gods control the weather and the clock. The ferocious wind does not stop. It blows continuously for an entire month. The sky remains perfectly clear, but the sea is impassable. Slowly, the remaining supplies on the ship disappear. The heavy bronze jars of wine run completely dry. The deep, gnawing pain of starvation begins. The men wander the beautiful island like ghosts. They fashion primitive hooks to catch small fish. They scour the beaches for crabs and seabirds. But the island offers them almost nothing. All the while, the sacred cattle graze nearby. The immortal beasts are perfectly healthy and thick with muscle. They represent absolute abundance just out of reach. The men watch them with hollow, desperate eyes. The temptation grows heavier with every passing day. Odysseus patrols the camp tirelessly. He reminds them constantly of their binding oath. He tries to keep their failing spirits intact, but leadership cannot fill an empty, aching stomach. The desperation of the crew reaches a breaking point. Exhausted and deeply worried, the king leaves the beach. He walks inland to a quiet, sheltered grove. He washes his hands and prays to the Olympian gods. He begs them for a favorable wind and salvation. But the gods answer his prayer with a heavy silence. Instead of a solution, they send a deep, unnatural sleep. Odysseus collapses onto the soft, green grass. His exhausted mind shuts down completely. He is temporarily removed from the agonizing reality. Back on the beach, the discipline of the crew finally shatters. Eurylochus stands before the starving, hollow-eyed men. He delivers a speech born of absolute desperation. He tells them that all forms of death are terrible, but starvation is the most pitiful, agonizing end of all. He argues they should face the gods like men. He suggests they sacrifice the finest cattle to the immortals. They will promise to build a massive temple in Ithaca. They will make amends for the desperate theft. He claims it is better to drown quickly than starve slowly. The logic is fatally seductive to dying men. The crew abandons their sacred oath entirely. They surround the magnificent, golden-horned cattle. They choose the absolute finest beasts from the immortal herd. They perform a hasty, hollow mockery of a sacrifice. They strip the shimmering hides from the massive animals. They roast the rich meat over open fires. The heavy smell of cooking beef fills the coastal air. For the first time in weeks, the men smile. But the divine retribution is terrifying and immediate. The gods send horrific, undeniable omens of their wrath. The flayed, bloody hides begin to move. They crawl across the sand like living, breathing creatures. The meat roasting on the wooden spits begins to low. The terrifying sound of living cattle comes from the dead flesh. It is a nightmare that defies all natural law. Deep in the island, Odysseus finally wakes. The unnatural sleep leaves his heavy limbs. The wind carries a familiar, devastating scent to his nose. It is the rich smell of roasting fat and meat. He knows instantly that his men are completely doomed. He runs back to the beach, his heart pounding. He sees the men gathered around the smoking fires. He sees the blood staining the pristine, golden sand. He cries out in sheer, absolute despair. He rebukes them for breaking their sacred oath. But the damage is entirely irreversible. The immortal beasts have been slaughtered and consumed. Far above the island, a divine messenger speeds to Olympus. He carries the terrible news directly to the sun god. Helios hears of the sacrilege and erupts in absolute fury. His voice thunders through the golden halls of the gods. He demands immediate, absolute justice from Zeus. He issues a terrifying, apocalyptic ultimatum. If these mortals are not punished, he will abandon the sky. He will take his light down into the underworld. He threatens to shine his life-giving rays only among the dead. The earth would be plunged into permanent, freezing darkness. Zeus cannot allow the natural order to be destroyed. The king of the gods speaks in a voice like rolling thunder. He promises to shatter the black ship into splinters. Back on the island, the horrific feast continues for 6 days. The men ignore the terrifying omens and eat their fill. On the 7th day, the atmosphere suddenly changes. The howling wind from the north completely dies away. The sea becomes perfectly smooth and inviting. A gentle breeze begins to blow from the south. It is the exact wind they need to continue their journey. But Odysseus knows this is not a blessing. It is a carefully crafted, divine trap. The men push the heavy black ship off the warm, golden sand. They row out into the perfectly calm, inviting waters of the Mediterranean. They are completely unaware of the divine judgment hanging above them. They believe the gentle southern breeze is a stroke of incredible luck. It pushes them steadily away from the island of the sun god. Soon, the green hills of Thrinacia completely fade from view. The ship is entirely alone on the open, glassy ocean. There is no land visible in any direction. Then, the brilliant blue sky suddenly turns the color of bruised iron. The clouds do not roll in, they simply manifest in the air. It is not a natural maritime storm. It is the pure, concentrated wrath of the king of the gods. The wind hits the vessel with a deafening, physical roar. The sea instantly transforms into a chaotic, churning nightmare. Lightning splits the black sky with blinding, terrifying violence. Zeus hurls a single, massive bolt of pure energy directly at the ship. It strikes the heavy wooden mast with a sound that shatters the ears. The heat of the strike is instantaneous and absolute. The sturdy Bronze Age vessel is blown into floating splinters. The air is filled with the smell of ozone and burning pine. The men are thrown violently into the freezing, dark water. Odysseus sees his loyal companions struggling in the massive waves. They reach for the broken wreckage, gasping for air, but the sea shows absolutely no mercy. They are dragged down into the crushing, lightless depths. The sacred cattle of Helios have exacted their ultimate, fatal price. The entire crew, men who survived 10 years of war, is gone. Only Odysseus is spared the immediate, watery death. He manages to lash the broken mast and keel together with a leather strap. He clings to the makeshift raft as the divine storm rages around him. He is completely alone. The king who sailed from Troy with a fleet of ships and hundreds of men now has nothing but a single, floating piece of broken wood. He drifts for 9 days under the burning sun and freezing stars. He is eventually cast upon the pristine shores of Ogygia. This is the hidden, luxurious island of the nymph Calypso. For 7 long years, he is held prisoner in an immortal paradise. He is offered eternal youth and unending, divine comfort. But immortality holds absolutely no appeal for a man with a broken heart. Every single day, he sits on the rocky shoreline and weeps. He stares across the vast, empty water, longing for mortal life. He desires the harsh, rocky soil of his own kingdom. He longs to grow old beside the woman he loves. Finally, the gods intervene, and he is allowed to build a raft. He survives one last, desperate storm sent by the vengeful Poseidon. He washes ashore on the island of the Phaeacians, a race of master shipbuilders. They hear his incredible story and offer him a magical, swift vessel. They carry him across the sea while he falls into a deep, dreamless sleep. When he wakes, the ship is gone, and the air smells entirely different. He looks around at the rugged hills and the ancient olive groves. After 20 agonizing years of war, monsters, and divine wrath, Odysseus is finally standing on the shores of Ithaca. He falls to his knees and presses his face into the warm, familiar earth. But the kingdom he left behind has fallen into deep, chaotic ruin. His grand palace is completely overrun by more than 100 violent men. These suitors believe the king is dead. They are consuming his vast wealth and aggressively courting his wife, Penelope. They are plotting to murder his young son, Telemachus. Odysseus knows he cannot simply march through the front gates. He must rely on the brilliant, calculating cunning that destroyed Troy. The goddess Athena disguises him as a withered, impoverished beggar. He infiltrates his own home, moving invisibly among his enemies. He observes their arrogant cruelty and tests the loyalty of his remaining servants. He watches Penelope descend the great wooden stairs, her face marked by years of grief. She has remained perfectly, completely faithful to a ghost. She announces a final, impossible contest to decide her new husband. She brings out the great, heavy hunting bow of King Odysseus. It is a massive weapon made of polished horn, unbending and cold. Whoever can string the bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads will win her hand. One by one, the young, arrogant suitors try to bend the ancient weapon. One by one, their strength completely fails them. The bow refuses to yield to lesser men. Then, the old beggar steps forward from the shadows of the great hall. The suitors mock him, laughing at his ragged clothes and grey hair. But he takes the heavy horn bow in his scarred, calloused hands. He does not strain or struggle with the wood. He strings the weapon in one smooth, effortless, flawless motion. The hall falls completely silent. He plucks the taut bowstring, and it sings with a sharp, terrifying note. He easily fires an arrow perfectly through the 12 iron axe heads. Then, the divine disguise simply falls away. The beggar vanishes, and the king of Ithaca stands in his own hall. He looks at the terrified men with eyes like cold, forged bronze. He exacts a terrible, absolute, and bloody vengeance upon the men who stole his life. He cleanses his home of the corruption that had festered for 2 decades. But the true climax of the Odyssey is not found in the bloodshed. It is found in the quiet, firelit chambers of the queen. Penelope is cautious, her heart heavily guarded by years of false hope. She tests this man, who claims to be her long-lost husband. She casually orders her servants to move their heavy marriage bed out into the hall. Odysseus reacts with sudden, genuine anger. He knows the bed cannot possibly be moved. He built it himself, carving the frame directly into the trunk of a living olive tree. The roots of the bed are anchored deep in the foundation of the palace itself. It is a profound, secret symbol of their unbreakable union. When he reveals this absolute secret, Penelope's defenses finally crumble. She runs to him, weeping, and they hold each other in the quiet dark. The 20 years of agonizing separation instantly evaporate. The wanderer is finally, truly home. But the story requires one final, quiet act of closure. Odysseus remembers the ancient prophecy of Tiresias. He takes a single wooden oar from his ship and walks far inland. He travels for weeks, away from the smell of salt and the sound of waves. He walks until he finds people who mistake the oar for a farming tool. There, deep in the peaceful mountains, he builds an altar. He makes his final, humble sacrifice to Poseidon. The anger of the sea god is finally appeased. The heavy, divine curse is completely lifted from his shoulders. He returns to Ithaca and rules his island in deep, lasting peace. Years later, as an old man, death comes to him gently from the sea. It is a quiet, painless end to a life of unimaginable endurance. The story of Odysseus is not merely a myth about monsters and magic. It is the ultimate human story of resilience, intellect, and profound longing. It tells us that the journey shapes the soul, but love calls it home. The Bronze Age has long since faded into the deep mists of time. The massive walls of Troy are nothing but buried dust. The Cyclopes and the Sirens have retreated into the shadows of human memory. But the echoes of this epic journey remain permanently with us. They remind us of the strength we carry in our own dark waters. The historical narrative is now completely finished. The long, turbulent voyage is finally over. The ancient Mediterranean Sea is completely calm tonight. The stars shine clearly, offering perfect, peaceful guidance. Let the heavy weight of the day slowly drift away. The sails are lowered, and the ship is safely in the harbor. Let the silence of the past settle softly around you. Breathe in the quiet peace of a long journey completed. There are no more storms to fight. There are no more miles to cross. Close your eyes, rest now, and sleep well.